Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. We've come to the end of another week. I've enjoyed sharing these devotions with you and hope they've been an encouragement, a blessing to you. Today, we are in chapter 10 in the book of Acts. So hopefully you've already read the chapter. If not, you can do so as soon as the devotion ends. But this is the chapter that tells the story of Cornelius, who was a Roman soldier, if you will, who was a very godly man, and Peter the apostle, and how God brought them together so that Cornelius and those in his house and his friends could be saved. And it's really a chapter that talks about the gospel overcoming barriers. That there are barriers that keep people from hearing the gospel, barriers that keep people from knowing how to be saved. And sometimes you and I, as the people of God, build those barriers. In this chapter, what is at the, what's obvious is that the Jewish people had some prejudices, if you will, toward the Gentiles, especially if they were a devout Jew. They would not enter their house. They would not eat with them. If they did, they would be considered ceremoniously or religiously unclean. And if you've read the chapter, you know that at the end of it, Cornelius and his family and friends, many of them become believers and are baptized and receive the Holy Spirit. And in chapter 11, which we'll look at Monday, when Peter returns to Jerusalem and everybody there heard about it, in verse 2 of chapter 11, when Peter came up to Jerusalem, those who were circumcised took issue with him. That means those Christians in Jerusalem who were of Jewish background. They have been circumcised as Jews and become believers in Jesus. Think of them today as Messianic Jews, but they still did not believe the gospel was for anybody but the Jewish people. And so they were upset with Peter for preaching, eating with, going into the house of a Gentile. So those prejudices were really, really strong. But you'll remember in this chapter, Cornelius is praying. God sends an angel to tell him to send for Peter. When Cornelius' representatives arrive at the house where Peter is staying, he's praying, and God gives Peter a vision, this sheep being let down from heaven, filled with all of these animals that are unclean for a devout Jew to eat. And God says, get up, kill them, and eat it. Don't call anything I've cleansed unclean. And Peter's wondering what that means when those men arrive, and God tells him, go with them. Don't hesitate, go with them. And Peter does, and he goes to Cornelius' house, and he shares the gospel with them. But you even get a sense of the barrier between Jews and Gentiles in chapter 10 with what Peter said when he got there in verse 28. He said to them, Peter said to Cornelius and all those in his house, you yourselves know, all you Gentiles know, how unlawful it is. In other words, the Jewish religious laws. How unlawful it is for a man who is a Jew to associate with a foreigner, a Gentile, or to visit him, to go into his house. And yet God has shown me that I should not call any man unholy or unclean, that I should not be unwilling to associate with, eat a dinner with any human being, is what he says. And down in verses 34 and 35, opening his mouth, Peter said, I most certainly understand now, this is what he's saying to the crowd, that God is not one to show partiality, but in every nation, in every ethnos, in every ethnic group, the man who fears him, who fears God, and does what is right is welcome to him. And then he goes on to preach Jesus, and Cornelius and those with him become believers. God had to do a work in Peter's life before he was willing to go share the gospel with a Gentile. The early believers in Jerusalem were of Jewish background. They were Jews who became Christians. And they had this built-in negative attitude toward Gentiles, toward pagans, if you will. And it was a barrier to them taking the gospel to the Gentiles. God had to address that, and he did with Peter, and he did with others. But this is a dramatic story. And part of the message of the book of Acts is how the gospel overcomes barrier after barrier after barrier to reach people of all types. Here's the message for you and me. Don't ignore people. Don't dislike or hate people. Don't count people as unworthy simply because they are different than you and me. We're all sinners. Don't look down at people and refuse to pray for them, refuse to share the gospel with them, refuse to love them, refuse to serve them, refuse to eat a meal with them because they are different, because they are, for example, a different race, belong to a different world religion, have a different sexual orientation, have a different political affiliation. We are all sinners. We all need Jesus. We all need the gospel. We all need forgiveness that's found only in Jesus Christ. And so you and I need to try our best to avoid us versus them thinking. That may be popular in the American culture, but it's ungodly among the people of God. Can you share a meal with someone who is radically different than you? Can you have a nice conversation? Can you be kind and nice? Can you love somebody who is the polar opposite of you and love them enough to pray for them to know the love of Jesus, love them enough to have a relationship with them, love them enough to sit down and eat lunch together at some restaurant, love them enough to watch a ball game together? Or are you like some of these Jewish Christians were when it comes to the Gentiles? We have to be careful that we don't allow the divisions in our culture to keep us from taking the gospel to everyone, because everyone needs it. Who do you need to reach out to today to invite them to church this Sunday? Who is someone that God has put in your life, but rather than developing a relationship with them and loving them and being a witness to them, you've just condemned them and ignored them and treated them like they're unworthy and like they're a nobody? Remember, no matter how different they are created in the image of God, and Jesus died for them. And you and I are to love them and take the gospel to them. Hey, God bless you. I'll see you Sunday.